High in the Rockies, retired SWAT officer Michael Carter thought the snow had buried everything that ever hurt him. Then, his German shepherd, Duke, stopped dead, ears up, body rigid, staring at a patch of ice that didn't belong. One careful scrape revealed the first clue, and the first warning. A friendly call from the county sheriff came the same day, like someone already knew what he'd touched. Now footprints circle his cabin, Duke's food is tampered with, and a dark SUV appears in the storm like a question with teeth. Michael can walk away and stay hidden, or cut deeper and wake a 30-year cover-up that still has eyes on the mountain. The next thing Duke finds changes everything. And if this story touches your heart, please make sure to subscribe for more. Your support truly means the world. And now, let's begin. Winter had sealed the mountains in white, turning sound into something brittle and rare, as if even noise risked breaking beneath the cold. Michael Carter woke before dawn, as he always did. At 62, sleep no longer came in long stretches, but in fragments stitched together by habit and memory. The cabin was dark except for the faint orange glow from embers in the stone fireplace, their heat already retreating. He sat up slowly, one hand resting on his knee until the stiffness eased, breath fogging the air. Years ago, pain had been something he ignored. Now it was something he negotiated with, quietly, without complaint. Michael was tall once. Age had taken an inch, maybe two, bending him slightly at the shoulders, but the frame beneath remained solid. His build was lean, corded rather than bulky, shaped by decades of functional strength instead of vanity. His face carried sharp lines carved by sun, wind, and a lifetime of controlled violence. High cheekbones, a straight nose that had been broken once and reset imperfectly, and deep-set gray eyes that missed very little. A short, neatly trimmed beard, steel gray now, covered his jaw, more from habit than style. He'd worn it through his final years in the department, kept it afterward because it reminded him who he'd been. He pulled on his boots and heavy jacket without turning on a light. The cabin was small, efficient, built by his own hands years earlier. No unnecessary corners, no clutter. Everything had a place because chaos had cost him too much once. Duke lifted his head from near the door the moment Michael stood. The German shepherd was old, nearly 12, his muzzle frosted white with age, his once black saddle dulled into charcoal. He was large even for the breed, thick through the chest, his back legs stiff when he rose. One ear no longer stood fully upright, folding slightly at the tip, a souvenir from a winter encounter with a mountain lion years ago. His eyes, amber and alert, followed Michael with unwavering attention. Duke did not move until Michael reached for his gloves. "Morning," Michael murmured, his voice rough from disuse. Duke's tail thumped once against the floor. No excitement, just acknowledgement. They understood each other that way. Outside, the cold was immediate and invasive. The sky was pale steel, the sun still hidden behind the peaks. Snow covered everything in clean, deceptive silence. Pines stood motionless, their branches bowed under weight. The air smelled sharp, sterile, and faintly metallic, the way it did after a long freeze. Michael stepped off the porch and paused, scanning the tree line out of habit. 30 years in law enforcement had taught him that routine was safety, but complacency was death. He no longer carried a badge or a radio, but the instincts had never left. They lived in the way he watched shadows and listened to absence. They walked toward the ridge as they did most mornings, Duke moving ahead by a few paces, nose low, gait steady. The trail was familiar, packed hard by weeks of use. Michael let his mind drift just enough to feel the ache in his joints, the reminder that time was no longer an abstract enemy. Somewhere beneath that thought, as always, lay another one he did not invite forward. Sarah. She came to him sometimes without warning, especially in the quiet. Sarah had been tall, nearly his height, with a slim build that made her seem fragile until you noticed the strength in her posture. Her skin had been warm olive, always kissed by the sun, freckles dusting her shoulders in summer. She wore her dark brown hair long and loose, usually pulled into a low knot when she was concentrating. Her eyes were hazel, expressive to the point of being dangerous. She could read a room faster than he could read a suspect. She had laughed easily once, before the case, before the night that ended everything. Michael pushed the memory away as Duke stopped abruptly. The dog's body stiffened, tail lowering, ears angling forward. Not alarm, not aggression. Something else. Duke took 2 steps back, then another, his nose lifting into the wind. A low sound escaped his throat, not a growl, but not a whine either. It was restrained, controlled. Michael stopped instantly. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Duke did not look at him. His eyes were locked on a patch of snow near a rock outcrop by the ravine. At first glance, it looked no different from the rest of the landscape. Just white, still, ordinary. Michael approached slowly, boots crunching softly. The closer he came, the more his own senses caught up with Duke's. The smell hit him first. Faint, but wrong. Not decay, not blood. Metal, old metal, and something else beneath it, damp, enclosed, like something that had not seen air in a long time. He crouched near the rock, brushing snow aside with a gloved hand. Beneath it was ice, thick and uneven, as if it had formed over something that disrupted the natural flow. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. There were marks, subtle, nearly erased by time and weather. Scratches, not from animals, too linear, too deliberate. Michael straightened slowly. This was not evidence. Not yet. It was not enough to mean anything. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. Most men would have started digging. Most men would have let curiosity take over. Michael didn't. He'd learned the hard way that the first instinct was rarely the right one, that impatience destroyed cases and people with equal efficiency. He reached into his pocket and removed a small strip of orange tape, tied it to a low branch nearby. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just a marker he would recognize. Duke watched him, tension coiled in every line of his body. "Not today," Michael said quietly, more to himself than the dog. "We look, we listen." They turned back toward the cabin, leaving the ravine untouched. As they walked, Michael felt something shift inside him, not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind that came before a door opened, whether you wanted it to or not. Back at the cabin, Michael poured coffee and sat at the small wooden table near the window. Duke lay at his feet, but his head remained lifted, eyes flicking occasionally toward the ridge. Michael noticed. He always noticed. He sipped slowly, the bitterness grounding him. The mountains had been his refuge for nearly a decade. He'd come here to escape the noise, the politics, the compromise. To live somewhere truth did not require permission. He had believed the past would stay buried if he walked far enough away from it. The mountains had not corrected him before. Now, in the quiet hum of the wind against the walls, Michael understood something with a clarity that left no room for denial. Whatever lay beneath that ice had been waiting, and the silence that morning was not empty. It was holding its breath. The snow began to loosen its grip after 3 days of weak sunlight and hesitant thaw, not enough to free the mountains, only enough to reveal what winter preferred to keep hidden. Michael Carter returned to the ravine just after midday, choosing the hour deliberately. Light mattered now. Shadows could invent things that weren't there, and he had spent too much of his life untangling illusion from fact. He carried only what he needed: a short-handled shovel, a pry bar dulled by age, a thermos of coffee, and a canvas tool roll that had followed him through 2 decades of service and another 10 of self-imposed exile. Duke stayed close this time, no longer ranging ahead, his heavy body brushing Michael's knee whenever the wind shifted. The old German shepherd moved more stiffly than he had a year ago. His hips complained on inclines, and his breathing came louder in the cold, but his focus had sharpened, not dulled. Age had stripped away recklessness and left behind something more valuable: judgment. His coat was thick, coarse to the touch, dark along the spine and lighter at the flanks, with scars half hidden beneath fur that told stories Michael had never needed explained. They reached the marked branch without ceremony. The orange tape fluttered faintly, the only unnatural color in a world reduced to white, gray, and pine green. Michael crouched near the rock outcrop, his movements careful, economical. He did not rush. He never rushed anymore. The ice had thinned where meltwater ran in narrow channels. He chipped at it slowly, listening to the sound it made. Ice spoke, if you paid attention. It cracked differently over hollow ground, over stone, over metal. When the tool struck something solid beneath the frozen layer, the vibration traveled up his arm in a way that made his jaw tighten. Duke backed away at once, hackles lifting. Not panic. Warning. Easy, Michael murmured, though he felt no ease himself. He cleared enough ice to expose a small section of corroded metal. It was flat, rectangular, partially embedded in rock, as if it had been forced there rather than dropped. Rust bloomed across its surface like an old wound. He wiped it with a gloved thumb and froze. A number. Or what remained of one. The cereal was faint, eaten away by time and moisture, but the spacing was familiar. Michael stared at it longer than he meant to, his mind moving backward through decades of equipment inventories, evidence logs, confiscation forms. He felt the old mental filing cabinets open without effort, drawers sliding free. It could be nothing, he told himself, old mining debris, scrap from a long-forgotten operation. The mountains were full of ghosts that belonged to no crime at all. He pried the object free with a grunt, the effort sending a sharp reminder through his shoulder. Pain flared, then settled into a dull throb. 62 was not forgiving. He wrapped the metal in canvas and slid it into his pack. Duke did not approach the exposed ground. Instead, he sat several feet away, body rigid, eyes fixed on the shallow depression left behind. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not audible so much as felt. That unsettled Michael more than the metal itself. They left without further excavation. The cold was deepening again, and Michael had learned when to retreat. That lesson had cost him once, cost him Sarah, cost him the badge, but it had also saved lives. Back at the cabin, he cleaned the metal carefully under better light. The number was incomplete, but the format refused to be ignored. It matched something issued, not manufactured for civilian use. His pulse remained steady, but something coiled tighter behind his ribs. He waited until evening before opening the old footlocker. It sat beneath the bed, scarred, dented, its hinges whispering when he lifted the lid. Inside were pieces of a life he no longer lived. Folded uniforms, a ballistic vest stiff with age, a service pistol cleaned monthly despite having no reason to be. Beneath it all lay the files. Michael removed them slowly, stacking them on the table with reverence and restraint. He did not look at everything. He never did. Some pages were still radioactive. The missing persons case surfaced sooner than he expected. 32 years ago. Late winter. A man in his 40s vanished near this very ridge. The report had been thin, the search brief. No evidence of foul play. Weather blamed, terrain blamed. Case closed with administrative neatness. Michael had been younger then, quicker, hungrier to trust conclusions. He studied the map again now, tracing the lines with a finger that bore a faint tremor he pretended not to notice. The coordinates overlapped. Not exactly, but close enough to raise a question he had never thought to ask. Duke lifted his head suddenly, ears angling toward the window. Michael stilled. Outside, the forest remained unchanged, no footprints, no movement, but something had shifted in the air, the way it did before a storm or a decision. The next morning, Michael drove into Glacier Creek. The town sat low in the valley, wrapped in smoke and routine. It had grown since he'd first passed through years ago, but not much. One gas station, one diner, one sheriff's office that looked too clean for the stories it carried. Michael parked near the general store, pulling his collar up against the wind. Inside, he ran into Thomas Hale. Hale was in his early 70s, tall but stooped, his frame thinning under layers of wool and denim. His beard was white and untrimmed, his hair long and tied back with a leather thong. His eyes were pale blue, sharp despite the years, the kind that missed nothing and forgot even less. He had been a forest ranger once, back when the mountains were less crowded and the rules more flexible. Retirement had not softened him. If anything, it had made him quieter, more observant. "Well, I'll be damned," Hale said, his voice gravelly. "Didn't think you still came down." "Here," Michael nodded. "Only when I have to." Hale's gaze flicked to Duke, who waited patiently outside, visible through the window. "Dog looks older." "So do we," Michael replied. They spoke briefly. About weather, about supply chains, about nothing at all. Michael asked one careful question, wrapped in casual tone. Hale answered without suspicion, but his expression shifted just enough to be noticed. Later, driving back up the mountain, Michael replayed that look again and again. By nightfall, the wind rose hard enough to rattle the cabin windows. Michael sat at the table, metal fragment beside the files, coffee untouched. Duke lay near the door, but his sleep was restless, paws twitching, breath uneven. Michael understood then what he had been avoiding. The clue was unwelcome, not because it was dangerous, but because it was familiar. It belonged to a pattern he knew too well, one where truth waited patiently while people looked the other way. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier this time, erasing tracks, smoothing edges. Inside, Michael Carter accepted something he had not planned to accept. This was not finished. The first sign was not dramatic. It did not announce itself with noise or violence. It arrived quietly, the way real threats always had. Michael Carter noticed the footprints 2 mornings after his trip to Glacier Creek. They were half filled with snow, softened by wind, but unmistakably human. Too large for a deer, too deliberate for an animal. They circled the cabin once, wide and patient, before fading into the trees. Whoever had made them had not approached the door. They had only looked. Michael stood on the porch for a long moment, shoulders hunched against the cold gray eyes scanning the tree line. His breath rose slow and controlled. He did not feel fear. What he felt was recognition. This was the space between warning and consequence, a place he had stood in many times before. Duke sensed the shift immediately. The old German shepherd moved closer than usual, his broad body angling subtly between Michael and the woods. His tail stayed low. His ears tracked sounds that never quite formed. Age had slowed his legs, but it had sharpened his judgment. Duke no longer chased threats. He measured them. Michael did not follow the tracks. He erased them instead, brushing snow carefully with a pine branch until the ground returned to its unbroken white. No reason to let anyone know he had noticed. That lesson had been burned into him decades earlier, during a hostage operation that ended with 2 funerals and a commendation he had never accepted. Inside, he went back to the table. The old files lay spread out again, but now there were new additions. Photocopies, notes written in a tight, angular hand, dates cross-referenced with weather reports. He had been careful, using public archives, retired contacts, places where curiosity did not raise alarms, or so he had thought. The call came that afternoon. The phone rang twice before he answered. Michael did not speak first. "Mr. Carter," a man said. His voice was even, professionally neutral. Mid-50s, if Michael had to guess. Someone who smiled often in public and rarely meant it. "This is Deputy Alan Rhodes, County Sheriff's Office. We received a request for archived incident information. Thought I'd check in, see if we could help." Michael leaned back in his chair, eyes on the window. Snow fell steadily now, thick and purposeful. "I was doing some personal research," Michael replied. "Old hiking routes, historical interest." There was a pause, not long enough to be suspicious, just long enough to be intentional. "Well," Rhodes said, "those records can be misleading, incomplete. Sometimes it's best to let old matters rest." Michael pictured him then. Alan Rhodes, average height, broad shoulders softened by time behind a desk, thinning hair cut short in regulation style. Clean-shaven, most likely. Men like that preferred the illusion of order, preferred conversations where they controlled the tempo. "I appreciate the concern," Michael said. "I'm not reopening anything." Another pause, this one slightly longer. "Good," Rhodes replied. "If you need anything, you know where we are." The line went dead. Michael remained seated for several seconds, the receiver still in his hand. The call had been polite, courteous, and entirely unnecessary, which meant it had not been about information at all. It had been about awareness. That night, Duke refused to eat. Michael noticed immediately. The dog sniffed his bowl, then stepped back, hackles lifting. He circled once, nose low, and let out a short, sharp huff. Not fear, disapproval. Michael crouched, examining the food. Same brand, same container. But something had been disturbed. The lid slightly off-center. The smell wrong. Not poison, not yet, but handled. Touched by hands that did not belong. Someone had been close enough to test boundaries. Michael dumped the food into the fire without hesitation. Duke watched, tension easing slightly as the flames consumed it. "Message received," Michael murmured. Sleep came lightly that night, not the broken sleep of old men, but the alert rest of soldiers. He woke twice to distant engine noise, once to nothing at all. Each time, Duke was already awake. 2 days later, the vehicle appeared. It was there when Michael returned from checking his traps, parked far enough down the trail to remain unseen from the cabin, but close enough to matter. A dark SUV, no plates visible from his angle. Snow dusted its hood, suggesting it hadn't been there long. Michael did not approach. He retreated instead, circling wide through the trees, keeping the wind in his favor. He had done this in worse places, against better trained men. The SUV was gone by the time the storm rolled in. That evening, as the blizzard closed ranks around the mountain, Michael sat by the fire and allowed himself one memory he rarely touched. Sarah had hated storms, not fear exactly, but impatience. She had been restless by nature, long-limbed and kinetic, always moving as if stillness were a temporary inconvenience. Her hair, usually tied back in a practical knot, would come loose in bad weather, dark strands escaping to frame her sharp cheekbones. Her skin had been smooth and warm-toned, quick to bruise, slow to heal. She had spoken to everyone the same way, direct, unflinching. That honesty had made her loved by some, resented by others. The case that changed everything had changed her too. Before it, she trusted systems. After it, she trusted people, and only a few of them. Michael had been one, until he wasn't. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Memory was a luxury. Awareness was a necessity. The next morning, Michael began preparations. He moved his routine slightly, left the cabin at irregular times, took longer routes back, checked his perimeter with a discipline he had not used in years. He did not carry a weapon openly. He did not need to. The mountains had taught him alternatives. Duke adapted without instruction. He no longer slept deeply. He positioned himself near exits. His reactions were slower, measured, but his presence was constant, a living alarm that required no batteries. Michael understood now. The past had noticed him, not because he had found the truth, but because he had begun asking questions in the wrong order, to the wrong people, and that meant the answers mattered. He did not intend to confront anyone. Not yet. First came patience, observation, letting the other side reveal how much they knew and how far they were willing to go. Outside, the storm erased the world again, burying tracks, swallowing sound. But beneath the snow, something had shifted. A line had been crossed, quietly, irrevocably. Michael Carter poured coffee, sat with Duke at his feet, and accepted the reality he had avoided since the first footprint appeared. He was no longer alone out here, and whoever had found him did not want to be remembered. The blizzard arrived without warning, the kind that erased edges and swallowed distance until the world shrank to breath, sound, and instinct. Michael Carter moved through it slowly, deliberately, his boots biting into crusted snow as the wind shoved at his shoulders like an impatient hand. The mountains were loud now, not with noise, but with pressure. Snow hissed sideways, needles of ice stinging exposed skin. Visibility collapsed to a few yards at best. He welcomed it. Storms hid as much as they revealed. Duke stayed tight to his left, the old German shepherd's massive frame angled into the wind, muscles bunching beneath a thick winter coat dulled by age but not by weakness. His breathing was heavy, steady, controlled. The white around his muzzle made his amber eyes seem brighter, sharper, as if age had stripped away softness and left only truth. He stopped often, lifting his nose, testing the air. When he moved again, Michael followed without question. They reached the rock face just as the storm tightened its grip. The entrance to the old stone shelter was nearly invisible now, a shallow cut in the mountainside that looked more like a shadow than a place. Michael would have missed it entirely if not for Duke's sudden halt and low, insistent growl. Quiet, contained, purposeful. The shelter was not natural. The stone had been shaped by hands, crude but intentional, stacked and reinforced decades earlier. Michael brushed snow from the entrance with gloved fingers, exposing a narrow opening that dropped sharply into darkness. Cold air spilled out, stale and unmoving, carrying the faint scent of oil and rust. He paused, listening. Nothing. Michael slid inside carefully, shoulder brushing stone, boots scraping frozen dirt. The space beyond opened into a low chamber reinforced with timber beams gone gray with age. Someone had been here recently. That much was obvious. The snow at the entrance had been disturbed, then clumsily concealed. A lantern hook hung from a beam, still warm to the touch when Michael brushed it. His jaw tightened. Duke entered last, body tense, eyes never still. The evidence lay scattered but deliberate. Old crates, a broken radio unit, a stack of folders wrapped in plastic sheeting, yellowed but intact. Michael knelt, heart steady, hands precise. This was not the mess of desperation. It was the residue of maintenance. Someone had kept this place alive. A voice echoed suddenly from outside, carried by the storm. Michael froze. Footsteps followed, heavy and unhurried, confident in terrain they knew well. The figure that emerged into the entrance was tall, broad through the shoulders despite the years, his posture still disciplined, still controlled. He wore a heavy parka and a knit cap pulled low, snow crusting his beard. His face was angular, sharp-jawed, weathered by cold and habit rather than age alone. Gray threaded his dark beard unevenly, giving him a perpetually stern expression. His eyes were pale, assessing, devoid of surprise. Frank Miller. Michael recognized him instantly. Frank had been a detective once, the kind who commanded rooms without raising his voice. Mid-60s now, but still solid, still carrying himself like a man who had never learned to back away. His hair, once black, had receded into a widow's peak and thinned to iron gray. He kept his beard trimmed close, military neat, as if chaos offended him personally. People had liked Frank, trusted him. Michael had, too. Once. "Didn't expect company," Frank said calmly, his breath fogging the air. His voice was measured, almost conversational, the tone of a man used to controlling outcomes. "Especially not you." Michael rose slowly, the movement careful on the slick stone. "You shouldn't be here." Frank's mouth twitched. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing." Duke growled, low and deep, placing himself half a step in front of Michael. Frank's eyes flicked to the dog, assessing, recalculating. "Still hiding behind instincts," Frank said. "Yours, I mean." Michael did not answer. He did not need to. The truth sat between them, heavy as the storm pressing against the mountain. Frank gestured vaguely toward the crates. "You were never good at letting things go. That's what ruined you in the end. Ruined her too." The name hovered unspoken, sharp and cruel. Sarah. Michael saw her again in that instant, not as a memory but as a presence. Tall and lean, standing with her weight on one hip, arms crossed, dark hair pulled into a careless knot. Her skin had been warm against winter, her eyes bright with intelligence and frustration. She had believed in process, until process failed her, until men like Frank explained mistakes away. Michael stepped forward. His boot slipped slightly on ice hidden beneath snow. The ground vanished beneath him, treacherous and sudden. He went down hard, shoulder-striking stone, pain blooming sharp and immediate. His breath left him in a grunt. Frank reacted without thinking, reaching into his jacket. Duke exploded forward. The old German shepherd moved with terrifying precision, age forgotten in an instant. He slammed into Frank's legs, driving him backward into the stone wall. Frank shouted, more in shock than pain, losing his footing as the storm howled into the chamber. Duke did not bite. He blocked. He pressed. He forced space. Michael rolled, grit and pain grounding him. He forced himself up, ignoring the burn in his shoulder, planting his feet wide this time, cautious, controlled. "Enough," Michael said, voice flat, unyielding. Frank froze, breath ragged, one hand pressed to the wall. His eyes flicked from Michael to Duke, then back again. He saw it then, not weakness, not recklessness, but resolve sharpened by years of restraint. "You don't understand," Frank said, quieter now. "What we did kept things contained. Order matters." Michael laughed once, humorless. "Order isn't truth." He stepped past. Frank, pulling a phone from his pocket. He had already taken photographs, logged serial numbers, recorded audio while Frank spoke. He had learned from his mistakes. Evidence did not sleep. It waited. Sirens would not come tonight, not through this storm. That was fine. Michael did not need closure. He needed transfer. He needed distance from local hands that had grown too comfortable with silence. Frank sagged slightly, the fight draining from him. "You always were stubborn." "And you always mistook control for justice," Michael replied. Outside, the storm roared, furious and indifferent. When they emerged hours later, the blizzard had begun to ease. The mountain exhaled. Duke limped slightly now, a shallow cut along his flank seeping dark against white fur. Michael pressed a bandage there with steady hands, murmuring low, grounding words meant as much for himself as for the dog. The shelter behind them stood silent again, but it was no longer asleep. Michael looked once at the mountains, then down at the evidence secured in his pack. The truth had woken, and it was not going back to rest. The winter did not end all at once. It loosened, reluctantly, as if testing whether it was safe to let go. Michael Carter learned this during the weeks that followed. Snow still lay thick on the ridges, wind still cut through the trees with practiced cruelty, but the mountains no longer felt sealed shut. They breathed again. So did he. The case reopened quietly. There were no flashing lights on the ridge, no crowds at the cabin, no spectacle to reward the long years of silence. Federal agents came and went with efficiency that suggested experience with places like this, places where truth had been buried by convenience. Michael met them once, briefly, at a ranger station down the valley. He answered questions, handed over copies, offered context without commentary. His shoulder ached when the weather shifted, but he did not mention the fall. Pain had already served its purpose. Duke lay at his feet during the meeting, bandage removed, fur regrowing in uneven patches along his flank. He looked thinner now, the hard winter taking more from him than it once did, but his eyes were clear. Alert. Peaceful. He no longer scanned every doorway. The agents did not treat Michael like a hero. He was grateful for that. They treated him like a witness who had stayed when others had chosen distance, like a man who had paid his dues in quieter currency. When they left, the mountain reclaimed its silence. Michael returned to the cabin before dusk. He moved more slowly these days, favoring his shoulder, mindful of his footing. The cabin greeted him with the familiar smell of pine, smoke, and old wood. He stoked the fire, set water to boil, and sat down at the table without turning on the overhead light. Twilight softened the room, rounding edges, forgiving imperfections. For the first time in years, he opened a box he had kept sealed. Inside were Sarah's things, not everything. He had learned long ago that memory did not need assistance, but these were the pieces he had not allowed himself to touch. A scarf folded neatly, still faintly carrying her scent, cedar and something citrus. A photograph of the two of them on a trail not far from here, her hair loose, dark and shining, her skin sun-warmed and freckled from a summer long gone. She stood slightly taller than the camera angle suggested, lean and strong, one hand on her hip, the other gripping his sleeve as if to anchor him to the moment. Her smile in that picture was restrained, thoughtful. Sarah had smiled like that when she trusted something, but had not yet tested it. Michael traced the edge of the photograph with his thumb. Sarah had not been gentle with lies. That was her gift, and her burden. She had believed in process because she believed people could be better if the system demanded it. When it didn't, when the system failed, she did not retreat. She pushed harder. That push had cost her allies. It had cost her sleep. In the end, it had cost her faith in Michael's silence. He closed the box, carefully. That night, he slept. Not deeply, not without dreams, but without the familiar weight pressing on his chest. When he woke before dawn, it was because Duke nudged his hand with a cold nose, tail wagging once, expectantly. Not urgently, not fearfully. Just a reminder that morning existed. They walked the ridge together after breakfast. Snow creaked beneath their boots and paws. The sky was pale blue. Thin clouds stretched like gauze across the peaks. The place where the shelter lay hidden was quiet now, unremarkable again. Michael did not approach it. He did not need to. The mountain had returned it to itself. Down in the valley, the town adjusted. Rumors circulated, then settled. Names surfaced, then disappeared from polite conversation. Some people avoided Michael when he came down for supplies. Others nodded with a little more respect than before. He did not linger long enough to notice which mattered more. One afternoon, a woman arrived at the cabin. She parked at the edge of the clearing and walked the rest of the way, hands visible, posture deliberate. She was in her early 40s, average height, athletic build, her movements efficient without being rigid. Her dark hair was cut short, practical, streaked with premature gray at the temples. Her skin was light brown, weathered slightly by altitude and sun. She wore a ranger's jacket with no visible insignia, boots scuffed from real use, not display. "Michael Carter?" she called, stopping a respectful distance away. He studied her for a moment before answering. "Yes." "My name is Elena Ruiz," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. "I'm with the regional field office. I wanted to thank you, in person." Michael nodded once. "You already did, in writing." Elena smiled faintly, acknowledging the deflection. Some things don't fit on letterhead. Duke approached her cautiously, sniffed the air, then sat at Michael's side. Elena noticed, her eyes softening. "He's a good dog," she said. "He's had practice," Michael replied. They spoke briefly, about logistics, about what came next and what wouldn't. Elena did not ask him to testify publicly. She did not suggest interviews or statements. She understood restraint. That told Michael everything he needed to know about her. Before she left, she hesitated. "For what it's worth," she said, "the record will reflect what you did. Quietly. Properly." Michael watched her walk back to her vehicle. He did not wave. As spring edged closer, the cabin changed, not in structure, but in purpose. Michael repaired a loose beam, replaced broken shingles, restocked supplies with less urgency than before. He began writing again, not reports, not statements, but notes, observations about weather patterns, animal movement, things that had once helped him survive and now helped him live. Duke slowed. There was no denying it. His steps were shorter, his rest longer. But he ate well, slept deeply, and followed. Michael everywhere with unshaken loyalty. On clear afternoons, he lay in the sun, eyes half closed, breathing easy. The vigilance had eased. That was the gift. One evening, as snowmelt ran down the ravine in thin silver threads, Michael stood on the porch and watched the light shift across the mountains. He felt older than his years and lighter than he had in decades. Both could be true. He understood that now. He could not fix every wrong. He never had been able to. But he had not turned away this time. He had stayed. He had listened. He had acted when silence demanded courage instead of comfort. Duke leaned against his leg, solid and warm. Winter would return. It always did. But it would not return empty. Michael Carter closed the door behind them, not to hide, but to rest. The truth doesn't always come from loud heroes or dramatic moments. Sometimes it comes from quiet people who refuse to look away one last time. In everyday life, we may not be able to fix every wrong or change the past, but we can choose not to ignore what feels wrong in front of us. Courage often looks like patience, integrity, and doing the right thing even when no one is watching. If this story resonates with you, share it with someone who believes in truth and accountability. Leave a comment with your thoughts or where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support more meaningful stories like this.